This podcast is proudly produced by Strise, the autonomous FinCrime department.
As it evolves, the individuals that they've recruited obviously are rewarded in terms of an incentive scheme, how much they can bring in terms of the organizations. And ultimately, they then utilize those individuals to do the recruiting on their behalf because it becomes a sales tool.
Welcome to The Laundry, the podcast connecting AML, compliance, and financial crime to the real world. Imagine more than 500 anti-financial crime professionals waking up in the dead of the night, in a cold sweat, and checking their emails on their phone. What would you think is the biggest thing interrupting their sleep? Well, according to the latest global financial crime report put out by Nasdaq Verafin, there's something even more pressing than deepfakes or even AML. It's about money launderers growing up, graduating, and acting more like Fortune 500 companies than criminals. I'm your host, Marit, CEO of Strise, and in this episode, we are asking, how do we combat the professionalization of money laundering? We'll be discussing what these money laundering networks actually look like, the human cost underneath the corporate language, and how we fight back with collective intelligence, AI, and FRAML. And to dive into this topic, I am here in central London with Kamlesh, Principal Strategic and Advisor of Fraud Solutions at Nasdaq Verafin. He has spent his career fighting fraud and financial crime at Tier 1 banks across South Africa, the US, and the UK. He's also a vocal advocate for breaking down the silos between fraud and AML team. Welcome to The Laundry.
Thank you.
And we're sitting here overlooking London and in grey and rainy weather.
Typical London weather.
Yeah, but let's dive into the discussion because this is very fascinating and timely enough. I just saw this morning in Norway, there had been arrest outs for professionals who setting up money laundering networks. So very timely to dive into this with you. But let's start by looking at what is it that we mean by professional networks? Because I think it's spoken a lot about in the industry, but what is it actually looks like? You put out a report and it said 63% of financial crime professionals now rank professional money laundering networks as their single biggest concern. Ahead of crypto, ahead of organized crime, like everything. But when we say professional, what is it that we actually mean? Can you describe it for us?
Yeah, so the professional networks are, the perception is it's a small little organization running a few people, or alternatively operating out of a person's bedroom, etc. Professional now defined in the true sense of an organization with numerous individuals behind the scenes. It's not one individual with a bag walking the streets with cash in it. Unfortunately, these professionals operate at a level where, like we mentioned in the report, a Fortune 500 company right now.
So they have an office, they have Slack, they have email, they have internal HR tools, like
Absolutely.
It's a business.
Absolutely. I think that's the whole thing behind it is they make themselves legitimate in the sense that they operate as an organization within the sphere of potentially sales, potentially some other industries. But unfortunately, they are doing nefarious crimes in order to capture cash that they then launder onwards.
Do they also rent offices in central London, you think? Should like real estate companies be wary?
Yeah, I mean, often you hear about scam centers, and those are typically related to Asia countries.
Yeah, this is what now after all of these stories emerging from Southeast Asia, that's what you think about. And that feels quite far removed from central London, but.
And, funny enough, we mentioned this yesterday. I was at the Global Anti-Scam Alliance in Lisbon, and the topic came up around scam centers, as it would anywhere else. And there was an individual from the US legal system that specifically spoke about scam centers in Asia. And yes, it's true. They do exist there at scale. But having said that, these threat actors now operate globally. So yes, they're definitely sitting in and about London. They would obviously find offices that are most cost effective. But at the same time, anywhere in the world, they definitely would be operating from where they feel they can capture a market. They have individuals who can work in those industries. And through their recruitment, they start to see some benefits in terms of either operating within the confines of certain regulations that have gaps in them,
Yeah.
And they abuse those opportunities in order to defraud organizations and individuals.
Okay, we need to talk more about those gaps, but let's rewind to when you also said recruitment and recruitment strategy. And if these companies or organizations operate like a Fortune 500 company, a key part is then having employees,
Yes.
which you need to recruit. So I'm guessing a big part of professionalizing this is to also have a solid recruitment strategy. But how do you go about that as a professional money laundering and scam operation?
So they operate on under a number of premises where they are actually either portrayed to be a legitimate company as a call center potentially, and then bring in individuals to support so-called financial institutions to be able to then recruit individuals in the space. And they get people with
So
the
they're
relevant
actually
skills.
posing as like a legit company and like we
Absolutely.
are looking for people to our call center, but then somewhere down the recruitment line they kind of then
They
say,
get
oh, by
groomed.
the way, it was, yeah, okay,
Yeah,
grooming.
they actually get groomed into then committing crimes that they weren't necessarily aware of. And that's sort of at the beginning stages. As it evolves, the individuals that they've recruited obviously are rewarded in terms of an incentive scheme, how much they can bring in terms of the organizations. And ultimately, they then utilize those individuals to do the recruiting on their behalf because it becomes a sales tool.
Yeah.
So they can then sell out their capabilities to individuals in terms of easy money or flexible opportunities, and ultimately that's what they do. And that's the one side of recruitment. The other side of recruitment is a bit more concerning because this relates to human trafficking, and I think that's a major concern where individuals are coerced into either being employed or doing activities which they're not comfortable doing. Alternatively, they may be held at ransom or their families may be held at ransom. And those are some of the things that, unfortunately, once you're in this network, it becomes very difficult to get out. We've heard from victims that have been caught out in these networks that, unfortunately, are too scared and ultimately take their own lives because they feel that they're just not going to manage through the potential of their family members being harmed through these criminals that operate these networks.
Yeah, no, thus of course is like it's so horrible hearing those humans suffering sides of this industry. So just to kind of summarize the recruitment strategy of these professional networks, they have like one part that is almost mimicking a real recruitment strategy, saying we have a call center, and then somewhere down the line it's like it flips and no, actually you're supposed to commit crime here. And then you also have the more, maybe not recruitment per se, but the human trafficking. So there's like various recruitment channels, sort of say,
Yeah,
so
and,
to staff up.
Absolutely. And I think in the current economic state, people are desperate to get into jobs, and ultimately they think they're doing good for themselves, for the community, etc. And as you go further down the line, you start to realize that, unfortunately, you're being recruited into a scam center that is defrauding potentially your own family members.
Yeah, that's actually crazy to think about. But so what are some of the cutting edge techniques that we are seeing from these professional networks? What kind of schemes, what is it that you hear from the ground?
So a fraudster or a criminal would look at every avenue where they can actually capture or get money in through various channels. What we do see is activity across financial sectors where individuals are tricked into making payments to accounts, alternatively giving away credentials in terms of their login details, being coerced into making a payment into a legitimate or perceived to be a legitimate account, but ultimately that money actually goes to a fraudster. In terms of their activities themselves, like we mentioned earlier, they operate as a proper business. So you would have targets. If it was a sales target, as they classify it as, that would then be a success in terms of getting X amount into the organization, and they'd move forward with that. Unfortunately, no one is safe from this. Even people that are well-educated, well-versed in the field.
Even us who work in the industry.
Absolutely, have been caught out. And it's unfortunate that, through various mechanisms, and we'll talk about this in a bit, but there's a lot that government is doing. There's a lot that regulation is driving in terms of some of the financial institutions and so forth, what they need to contribute. But unfortunately, there are still loopholes in the ecosystem that gets abused.
Yeah. And you also mentioned earlier, like, okay, wherever there is a gap, wherever there is something to abuse, a fraudster will come in and do that, and now at big scale. But what are some of those loopholes or gaps that you guys have seen lately that have actually, that you can see leading to people or businesses or the state or the government, that's a huge problem in Norway, being defrauded?
So the first thing is the lack of sharing of information amongst financial institutions, between the private and public sector, purely because fraudsters look for those opportunities where if they're targeting one organization, you're not sharing that information, they can leverage that same threat against another institution or another individual. That's the first concern. And that's something we're passionate about, is in terms of trying to ensure that there's a lot more collaboration. And there's two words. In fact, one of the ex-FATF presidents actually mentioned it at one of the United Nations events. And he said, there's coordination and collaboration. And coordination is great because you work together. But collaboration is where you start to share more in-depth level information where you can actually identify risk before it even knocks on your door, because potentially that same risk has hit someone else or another institution. So from that perspective, those are some of the things that we do see. And like I mentioned, it's anything from where they can gain financial value out of. So if it's something along the lines of, as an individual, they can intercept someone's email as part of maybe a property purchase they are making. They can intercept, review the email, have a look at what content is there, and then ultimately move that money on. And one of the big things is often it refers to fraud in that sense, but ultimately it becomes an AML challenge is because fraud is normally the predecessor to money laundering.
You need to move the money, and then it's money laundering, and then you have FRAML.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where I think the intersection between the two need to come far closer together.
Yeah, I agree. And we'll get on to how we fight back against these professional industries. But just, I mean, from what I'm seeing as well in Norway, it's such a big problem, an understated problem, how much defrauding it is of the state. And the kind of gaps between the corporate registry, so like Companies House, where you have like all the information about businesses, and then it's the tax authorities where VAT refunds are processed through and a lot of that information, or just employee information, salary information, and then the kind of social benefit company that pays out social benefit, and the gaps between these three entities, and then of course the police and the investigators, the gaps between these entities are just so abused that it just makes you, I mean, it makes me so angry just thinking about it.
Yeah.
And then if you could have a holistic picture, maybe we could fight back. But of course, the counter argument is that, okay, you'd have almost like a 1984 kind of state where, you know, the police, the tax authorities, the Companies House record, like the state has everything together in one place. And it doesn't take that much imagination to turn that into quite a dark scenario too. But from what I'm seeing now, it's just, there's so much money going to scammers that I think we need to move in that direction.
Yeah, and I think that's where some of the things is, right? It's normally these governments are large institutions, much like, you know, most Fortune 500 companies are large institutions where individuals don't necessarily talk to each other. They don't communicate. Each person has got a function to do. They come in the morning and they perform their function. They don't look beyond their role in terms of what's happening. And I think similarly, you know, there are various scenarios in terms of where fraud plays out. You get the corporate fraud where, you know, individuals within organizations through insider risk or the rest of it comes about. You get the benefit frauds you mentioned. Absolutely, that's another element of
tax evasion, the VAT refund. I just saw the story about how they have now dismantled and arrested this, I think it was in Portugal, the huge kind of VAT refund scandal, and it's just like billions going out of the European taxpayers' money to these criminal networks, and you cannot operate that with one person, right? These are professional networks that spans across countries that is just set up to get VAT money out of it. And of course, everything goes hand in hand. So you don't do, oh no, we're gonna limit ourselves to VAT refund. Of course, you do a lot of other things as well, and in Norway as well. When you hear about like human trafficking, it's very easy to just put think that's only sex work. But the main problem now is, of course, is people coerced coming in to work as in the construction industry and various like manual labor work. And there's a huge problem with salary theft. Yeah. So you actually pay out salary, but you take it back, and then you have a lot of legitimate looking businesses. So then you can move on to various like tax evasion and benefit fraud, and also getting, of course, credit at a bank because you look like a legitimate business, and then you get that, you use it, and you disappear and bankrupt the company. Yeah. And there's just the human cost left.
No, absolutely. And I think that's the key point there, right? Is there's a human element behind it. People often think, well, it's a victimless crime because the bank has been hit or money is out of a bank and they'll just reimburse, especially in the UK with our reimbursement framework. The individual gets reimbursed. Unfortunately, the money that leaves the ecosystem gets laundered through the various channels and gets used for terrorism financing, gets used for human
or just
trafficking.
Defrauding more people and just moving all the money out of the system into criminal networks. But all right, we could talk about this forever, but now we need to dive into how we can fight back against these new professional industries. We'll be right back.
That sound. Nobody moved, did they? That's what 2,400 alerts on a Monday morning feels like. Eventually, your team stops reacting. Not because they don't care, because the volume has made every alert feel like noise and real risk gets buried. Strise automates the routine cases, the low-risk predictable ones that never needed analyst judgment in the first place. So when a real alert fires, people actually hear it. And every alert and decision is logged so you can explain what happened and why. Welcome to the Autonomous FinCrime Department. Book a demo at strise.ai.
Welcome to The Laundry. A reminder that all Laundry hosts are active on LinkedIn, so please drop us a message if you want to discuss today's episode. All right, we have talked about how professionalization is growing into money laundering. It's now, we're not fighting individuals anymore, we're fighting essentially Fortune 500 companies. So what are the tools in our toolbox to fight back? In your report, you had a lot of statistics on what the professionals in the industry think is needed to fight back, and 37% of respondents named AML transaction monitoring as the top area where AI is having the biggest impact on efficiency and effectiveness. But also 75% say AI implementation is the biggest AML challenge. So what do we do with those numbers? How do we think about that?
Yeah, so AI is both an adversary and it's a friend. AI is not necessarily the silver bullet, but we should consider it a golden thread, because there's opportunities in terms of how we can leverage AI in terms of identifying threats far quicker, at pace, at scale. That's a key element, because we know there's fraudsters are utilizing AI to do their threat vectors as well. So that's a key aspect of it. From our perspective, the ability for an organization to use AI and identify a risk frees up individuals doing mundane work every single day, day in, day out. They can spend a lot more of their time in terms of identifying high value, high risk items that they can then do deep dive investigations into to identify a risk.
Yeah, I think I am at least very excited to see AI being used more. And I explained this at a conference last week as well, that, you know, I work in a technology business, essentially. We deliver technology to AML and KYC teams. But this year, it's been a huge transformation for a big part of our business, because now developers don't have to do all the coding manually anymore. You have Claude who can do it for you, and you supervise, you set direction, you define the problem. And what has happened? Well, you just move the work to like a higher level. And it actually didn't turn out like in the beginning of the year, it was a lot of doomsday prophecy. No, we need even more coders now because we can be so efficient. We just want to do more. And I think the future for AML compliance professional is great, because you can move away from doing that manual work to getting to that higher level where the work can be like, does this make sense? Okay, we're onboarding this corporate client. Does it make sense? Because if businesses don't get access to a bank account, then it's hard to do salary fraud and human trafficking. It's hard to defraud, like get benefits back from the government. Like it's very, very hard to do a lot of things without a bank account at scale. So I'm really hoping we could move from manual work to does it make sense and using our judgment, because it is essentially judgment work. But you are a big believer in FRAML. It's like, you know, combined fraud and AML approach. And I remember first time I heard about FRAML, and it was one of the first episodes we did of The Laundry. And I just, wow, that was such an exciting term. And this was in 2022 when we launched. So it's been a little moment. And do you still believe in that approach? Because that was a huge promise in 2022.
Absolutely. In fact, over 8-10 years ago, I was at a financial institution and we're talking about FRAML in the true sense of using data from fraud and sharing it with AML teams.
It's been around for a while.
It has been around for a while. And I think it wasn't formalized at the time, but the mere fact that the institution saw the benefit of taking data sets from one part of within their own organization into another part of the organization, and the amount of risk we saw between the two, how money was flowing from, like I mentioned before, the predicate of AML is fraud, and ultimately that money is potentially even laundered through the same organization through an account and exfiltrated through someone's either a wallet or a normal check account, etc.
Yeah, how far did you guys get with FRAML then 8-10 years ago?
So that specific organization is one of the most advanced in the industry.
Okay, so that one, they were able to crack it.
They've moved significantly on in comparison to the rest of the market, in my opinion. They are probably one of the market leaders in terms of identifying risk from a fraud perspective, from an AML perspective. And they do show this. They are a global organization, so from that perspective, they do, show that they do lead the market, and they are innovative in their thinking. So again, having that ability to leverage data at the level that you have within your own organization, minimum investment, maximum value. And I think that was the key thing out of it that we've learned. Unfortunately, a lot of the other organizations across the globe have disparate systems, so they operate in silos, and that's something that needs to come together in terms of sharing information within their own organizations, and then further beyond that is start to share information outside in a consortium network to be able to identify risk patterns across the network.
Yeah, like we talked about, getting to that data sharing so that we also start operating a bit like the criminal networks and sharing data in between.
Absolutely. They are doing it. Why shouldn't we?
That's true. We have a lot of legislation to kind of go through before we get there, though. We do think about the long-term effects, privacy, and all these things. So it's not straightforward. Yeah. Even though, of course, as a professional, I'm also like, let's get all the data together and everyone can use it and we can stop the fraudsters. But I do understand like the privacy fighters too. It's a very tricky balance.
It is. The good thing is, obviously, on the one side, regulators have seen the value in it, and obviously the concern if they don't move forward with these. But at the same time, like you said, these financial institutions, even the Fortune 500 companies, are bound by those regulations in terms of information sharing, which poses a real risk in terms of them being able to share information without being held liable for what they're doing. Although we say that we're waiting on regulation, and we know PSR, PSD3 would be coming out hopefully in the next few weeks, the finalized version, we should get some sort of leverage on that. If we look at GDPR today, there are clauses in there which states that you can share personally identifiable information to support the need to fight financial crime, provided it's done for the right reasons, within a framework. And some of the things that we talk about in the AI space apply similarly in this space, would be transparency, auditability, and explainability. The ability to be able to explain why a certain decision is made, the transparency around it, that it's not being done in a black box, and then having the necessary audit logs. So when a regulator does visit your office, they can have a look and see the necessary steps that were taken and the ultimate outcome that was derived from that data.
So in our toolbox, it's of course, AI, just starting to apply that so we can move to like a higher level of work. It's about starting applying the very old but still new idea of FRAML, bring your fraud and AML data together, because essentially it is a bit two sides of the same coin. And in terms of like regulatory blockers, there is very soon there's new coming out, or the finalized version that can enable it. And also just take a second look at the GDPR. We can share some information now. A final question before we move on to the quickfire. Let's just be brutal honest about the state of play. The criminals, they are organized, they are now professionalizing, they're using the same tools as we are to organize as a business, they're AI enabled, they have recruitment strategy, and they don't care about regulation. And we are a bit siloed, some are resource constrained, and we're waiting on regulatory clarity. So can we close the gap, in your opinion, or are we just doomed to lose slowly?
We are traveling in the right direction. One thing we need to be cognizant of is if we're going to continue to do the same thing, we can't expect a different result.
Isn't that the Einstein quote? Or like if you keep doing the same thing but expecting a new outcome, that's the definition of insanity?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the key thing. We need to have a fundamental change in the way we think, in the way we operate, leveraging, like we mentioned, the same tools that are available out in the industry in terms of AI, information sharing, consortium data, analytics, etc. That will give us the ability to look beyond our four walls and look into a broader network to be able to identify risk well before any unfortunately nefarious activity takes place. And that's the key thing. If we can stop the gateways where these funds are being exfiltrated from, that will be a start in terms of ensuring we tackle the challenge that we have on hand at this stage. Yes, it often seems that we are fighting an endless fight that's never going to come to an end, and we are not winning. In fact, some of the data that keeps on coming out and will come out in the near term continue to reflect similar trends, that there are concerns with either an increase in certain types of fraud or certain types of threats. It may not be as high in terms of value, and our report showed $4.4 trillion losses or in the ecosystem in terms of criminal funds in that space. And I think that's a concern, is that if we're talking about 4.4 trillion now, is this going to be double, triple in a short period of time? And if we don't do anything, yes, that's a reality.
Yeah. I think also it should provoke people that, okay, you're taking the train into London, you're doing your work. At the same time, there is some like criminal CEO who sits at a beach somewhere at a 5-star hotel resort and is actually paying for that with the embezzled funds. Like that is, people should be really livid about that. But one of the things that shocks me is that I feel they're coming out stories all the time about how big the problem is, how severe it is, the human suffering, but we just keep the status quo, or there's not like a big revolution. We're not out marching in the streets. And again, back to this point about the state also being defrauded so heavily. I wish now that on every people's payslip, there was, okay, here's how much you earn, here is the taxes, and by the way, X amount of your taxes is now actually going to criminal networks because we are just being defrauded. And I think something like that would wake people up to the problem and we would close that gap super fast. But that's just my personal opinion. Maybe, I don't think it will be practical to do, but that would make people wake up. But are you ready for some quick fire questions before we end? I'll say something, you'll say first thing that comes to mind.
Let's go for it.
One myth about money laundering you wish the industry would let go of.
You can't share information across institutions or across your own organization.
Yes, we need to drop that one right now. Who should the senior player be in a FRAML team? Fraud or AML?
Neither. The customer should come first.
Good one. What is the biggest red flag that you're dealing with a professional laundering network as a compliance professional?
Look for synergies that look similar to an organization, but certain anomalies that stand out.
The biggest impact on the professionalization of money laundering we could make tomorrow is?
Do nothing.
True. That brings this spin of the laundry to an end. Kamlesh, thank you so much for joining me. If people want to continue this conversation with you, where can they find and connect with you?
You can connect with me on LinkedIn, Kamlesh Harry. Alternatively, look us up, www.verafin.com.
Money makes the world go round.
And thanks to everyone who was listening and spending this 30 minutes with us, even if you were walking or tuning in from the train. Thank you so much. If you've enjoyed this podcast, you can check out the back catalog of more than 160 episodes. And if you're super interested in FRAML, you could probably scroll back to episode 10 and listen to that from 2022. Please follow The Laundry on your podcast platform of choice. Share the podcast on social media channels, tell a colleague about it, or maybe even start a little FRAML club and drop it in there. Give us a 5-star rating. It really helps people to find us. And if you have any ideas, email us at laundry@strise.ai. Your host for this episode was me, Marit. Our producer was Matthew. Dominic is doing the edit, and see you next time.
Yeah, money make a world go round.
Yeah, of course, no clapping. We don't have the video.
You can clap if it makes you feel better.
Professional hazard. This podcast is proudly produced by Strise, the autonomous fin crime department.